start with Mr. Weddleton. Anything you'd like to pull, Mr. Weddleton?
I didn't want to pull anything, but I can comment on some actions I would take just to, is that out of order right now?
No, Mr. Weddleton, please comment.
Okay, on 14L, my intent is to postpone that indefinitely. It's being replaced by item F10, which is introduced this evening. And also on 14M, that's 2016-62, I also intend to postpone that indefinitely, and we'll get something later on that will take care of that.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Dunbar.
Yes, Madam Chair. I'd like to pull item 9A2, item 9E5, and item 9F5. I'm sorry, A2, E, Echo 5, and F, Foxtrot 5.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. And Mr. Starr.
No items.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to pull 9A1 for reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Steele.
Yes, Madam Chair. I want to pull AR 2016-173 for reading.
983.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Trainee.
9E7, Madam Chair. I'll pull that one.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 9, Foxtrot 12 on the laid on the table items.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Evans.
No items, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Mbosky.
No items.
Thank you, Mr. Mbosky. Okay, we have pulled item 9A1, item 9A2, 9A3, item 9 Echo 5, Echo 7, and 9 Foxtrot 5, and also 9F12. Did I miss any? Okay. All right. Item number 9A1, AR 2016-147, recognizing and celebrating the diversity of Mountain View with the Mountain View Street Fair on June 11, 2016. Mr. Peterson? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Move to approve.
Mr. Peterson, hold on a moment. I forgot to have us vote on the remaining items for the consent agenda. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Please vote on the remaining items on the consent agenda. Thank you. There's, oh, okay, Mr. City of Mountain View with the Mountain View Street Fair on June 11, 2016. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Move to approve.
Is there a second? Second. Thank you. Ask unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, that is approved. Who's going to read and who's going to present?
I'm reading. Mr. Flynn is presenting, I believe.
Excellent.
Whereas Mountain View has been recognized as the most diverse neighborhood in the United States, and whereas the Mountain View neighborhood is proud to have been featured recently by the national news outlet CNN for its diversity, and whereas in 2009, Cook Inlet Housing Authority, Anchorage Community Land Trust, and the Mountain View Community Council collaborated to celebrate neighborhood unity and highlight neighborhood revitalization efforts with a street fair featuring live music, games, refreshments, and fun. And whereas since its beginning in 2009, the Mountain View Street Fair has been held annually and tens of thousands of attendees have made the event a great success. And whereas the diversity of Mountain View neighborhood sparks a neighborhood event like no other in Anchorage. And whereas the Mountain View Street Fair is a day for neighbors and friends to celebrate the diversity of the neighborhood and the rich cultural heritage of the residents. And whereas the Mountain View residents invite all Anchorage residents to celebrate the diversity by visiting the street fair. Therefore, the Anchorage Assembly resolves that Saturday, June 11th shall be recognized as the 8th annual Mountain View Street Fair, and encourages Anchorage residents and visitors to attend the 8th Annual Mountain View Street Fair to celebrate the most diverse neighborhood in the United States. Passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly this 7th day of June, 2016.
Madam Chair, if I may,
Certainly, Mr. Flynn.
on behalf of the good people of Mountain View, and I hesitate given I have some other neighbors in the audience who are from a different neighborhood, an outstanding neighborhood, perhaps the finest, but at least close to it. Easy bike ride for even those of you from Eagle River, just right down the highway, and suggest you come visit. This is a terrific event. Mountain View is really doing some great things these days. I don't know how many of you have read about the great new pizza place in the Glen Square Mall, in addition to the existing Zala's Mexican place, and of course the Bass Pro Shop. So something for everybody. It's a terrific neighborhood, terrific event. I hope you can all be there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Next item on the agenda is AR 2016-169, recognizing Alaska Pride Fest 2016 and encouraging the Anchorage community to celebrate the diversity of the state of Alaska. Mr. Dunbar.
Move to approve.
Is there a second? Thank you. Ask unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, that is approved. I will present, and I think Mr. Dunbar is going to read.
Yes, ma'am. Is there someone here from the organization?
There's quite a few folks.
Excellent. All right. So a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing Alaska Pride Fest 2016 and encouraging the Anchorage community to celebrate the diversity of the state of Alaska. Whereas Alaska Pride Fest is sponsored each year by Identity Incorporated, an organization that provides a full range of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community services as an Alaska 501c3 nonprofit organization. And whereas Alaska Pride Fest 2016 is a week-long celebration held June 18th to June 25th of Alaska's diversity and of the LGBT community's journey through Many Voices, One Message, which is the theme of this year's celebration. And whereas Anchorage residents can join the festivities, including the Alaska Equality Parade in downtown Anchorage on Saturday, June 25th, 2016 at 11 a.m., culminating with Pride Festival on the Delaney Park Strip with entertainment, vendors, and food from 12 p.m. until 5 p.m. And whereas the first LGBT Pride parades took place in June 1970 to mark the one-year anniversary of the Stonewall riots, and whereas events are held annually to recognize and celebrate the diversity of communities across America, therefore, the Anchorage Assembly recognizes June 18th to June 25th as Alaska Pride Fest 2016 and encourages the Anchorage community to join in celebrating the diversity within the municipality of Anchorage and the state of Alaska, passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly this 7th day of June 2016. Thank you, guys. Would you like to say a few words?
Absolutely. Thank you. Esteemed Assembly, thank you for this honor again. On behalf of Identity and the Alaska Pride Fest Committee and the thousands of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender in Alaska, we thank you for this honor. Alaska Pride Fest Week is the state's #1 LGBT movement and celebration for the year, and we're honored to be a part of that. And like Mr. Dunbar had mentioned, our theme this year is Many Voices, One Message, and our message is one of inclusivity. And we thank you for allowing us to celebrate that.
Thank you. JJ, can you say your name and spell your last?
Oh,
for the
sorry,
record?
JJ and then Harrier, Harrier.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to make any comments? All right. Well, thank you for being here this evening. See you on the 25th.
All right.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is AR 2016-173, a resolution of the Anchorage Assembly recognizing and honoring George J. Vacalis for his service to the municipality of Anchorage. Mr. Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Vacalis, can we get you to come down?
We need a motion, Mr. Steele.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Ask unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, this resolution is approved. Welcome.
Whereas George Vacalis was raised in Berwick, Maine, joined the Army in 1966, serving in Germany, the Republic of South Vietnam, North Carolina, Kentucky, Kansas, South Carolina, Georgia, New Jersey, Washington, California, Arkansas, and Alaska during his 28-year career. And whereas Colonel George Vacalis' last duty assignment was as garrison commander, U.S. Army Garrison, Alaska, overseeing 3 Army posts in Alaska and all aspects of their operations. And whereas following his retirement from the Army, George served as operations manager for the municipality of Anchorage, 1994 to 98, a municipal manager from 98 to 2000, and the Anchorage School District as assistant superintendent for operations and support services, 2000 to 2009. And whereas George again served as municipal manager from July 2009 through June 2015, overseeing the day-to-day operations of the nation's 63rd largest city, with a budget in excess of $400 million and 2,500 employees. And whereas George Vacalis has devoted his entire adult life, to public service, earning a reputation as a dedicated, consummate public servant, while serving with integrity and distinction. Now, therefore, the Anchorage Assembly resolves George J. Vacalis is recognized and honored for his many years of service to the municipality of Anchorage and the state of Alaska and the United States of America. Passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly this 7th day of June, 2016.
Madam Chair, is this where I say a few words?
Please, please.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, Madam Chair, Assembly members, administration, thank you so very, very much for this honor. It's very humbling. It really is. And in some respects, I feel a little guilty. And the reason I feel a little guilty is that I've had a heck of a time, a great time doing the job. And to be recognized for something that I enjoyed, truly enjoyed doing, is kind of interesting, I have to tell you. But I certainly have enjoyed working for the city, for the school district, and serving our country in the military. And I guess one of the things that I learned early on in my military career, and it certainly has shown itself over and over again in many, many different capacities. And that is, no matter who you are and what recognition, awards, or decorations you receive, it's not you alone that's done that. It's not. It's the great people that have stood behind you and supported you and were loyal. It's the great people that you've worked side by side with. And it's also the great leadership that you've had over the years, whether it be mayors, generals, assembly members, school board members. All that is what really contributes to any individual, whoever they are, for receiving any type of recognition. And I am so appreciative of the many, many folks that I've gotten to lead and work with over the years, and for all of the support that they've given me. And I could never, ever repay that. It's just astronomical. And so it's very humbling and heartfelt that I'm able to receive this. But I will say that by receiving this, I'm not receiving it just for myself. I'm receiving it for all of those folks for all of these years that have done the great things to support me. And I appreciate that. And as an aside, it's hard to keep a surprise from me, okay? I think most of you know that. And so we're supposed to be going out to dinner tonight, and my wife decided she'd drive, and she said, we got to make a short detour. And I said, you know, I didn't think too much of it. Okay, a short detour. Then we pulled in to the library, and I said, well, why are we going into the library? You'll see. But there's an assembly meeting tonight. I know. Well, here I am. But I'm very appreciative, and thank you so very, very much for everything that you've done to help me, and for everything that you do to help the city. And I'd like to introduce my daughter, and I think you all know my wife. So thank you.
Don't go away. Ms. Domboski.
Thank you, Mr. Vacalis. I have never been able to call you George because, to me, I respect you so much, and I just wanted to say it's great to see you here. It looks like retirement, if that's in fact what you're doing. I have a feeling you can't not be busy, but but it looks like it's fitting you well, and I really want to say from the bottom of my heart, you were the first person who kind of had the patience to sit down with me and walk me through some of the different ways that the city government operates, and you taught me a new way to look at things. And I will never forget, it will go with me to my grave, just to remember the first story is usually wrong, which makes me stop and not have that knee-jerk reaction. It makes me stop, assess the situation, dig deeper for facts, and be open to whatever those facts are. And I want to say thank you. You made me a better public servant and a better assembly member, and it's because you had the patience to deal with me. And I want to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Domboski. Mr. Trainee.
George, just thank you so much for all your work. You and I spent a lot of time here, you over there and me here, and you were always a class act. Appreciate what you did for this town, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Flynn.
Oh, Mr. Vacalis, I should say you're the luckiest man in the room. You're taking two lovely ladies out to dinner, and the rest of us are stuck here on a beautiful June evening. So sit on the deck and have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Steele.
Yeah, George, boy, it seems like I worked with you for a long time. And I really do appreciate the recognition of others, those folks that work with you as well. But it also takes leadership. And that's what you had with Spades. And so good job. Thank you for everything. Personally, like I said, you helped me a lot. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. So, George, just a couple of comments. Were you surprised that you were asked to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? It's a new thing I started, you know. Anyway, thank you so much for your service. We are truly honored to have known you and worked with you, because Dick and I have worked with you probably longer than anybody up here. And we wish you well. Thank you for being here this evening.
Well, thank you, and thank you all so very, very much. Thank you.
Okay, we are now at 9 Echo 5, Assembly Memorandum AIM 68, 2016, Quarterly Bar Safety Hour Permit Report. Mr. Dunbar.
Move to approve.
Move to accept.
Move to accept, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Dunbar?
So I was just hoping that we could discuss this just very briefly. I certainly want us to approve this. I noticed looking at this that only 5 bars or establishments had applied for the bar safety hour, and one of them, the Avenue, of course, is no longer in business. And so I was wondering if we could have a brief discussion on the record of why we think that there are more establishments aren't applying for it. And then also, I'd like to request the Public Safety Chair, Mr. Evans, if we could get this on a future agenda at some point of the Public Safety Committee. So, Madam Chair, I was wondering if I could start by just having the Chief come up and ask him a question or two.
Certainly, Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Chief. So I know that this is not a widely used program, so you might not have strong feelings about it, but I was wondering if you did have any thoughts on why you think the safety hour perhaps isn't used by establishments downtown very often.
Yes, it's my understanding there's over 200 liquor licenses and only about 150 taxi licenses. And the incentive, strictly looking at a business incentive-wise, that it's not generating additional income during that additional hour of staying open. As far as APD is concerned, though, we've had no problems with the program.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. I guess I have no real follow-ups to that. I mean, that's basically what I thought. How close would you describe the relationship right now between the APD and the bar owners in the downtown area?
I would consider it very good.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all the questions I have. If anyone else.
Thank you, Mr. Tully. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Trainee.
Mr. Dunbar, I think part of the problem is we've had 2 mild winters. I think if we have a winter that gets traditional down to minus 30, minus 20, you'll have a lot more bars stepping up on this, because this is designed to allow the patrons to stay in the establishment, not serve alcohol, but at least stay warm for a while until the transportation is provided for them. And we've been fortunate the last 2 winters have been mild winters here. So that's at least my philosophy on it.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Madam Chair, can I ask a question of the clerk as well?
Certainly, Mr. Dunbar.
So, Madam Clerk, I know that you administer this program. Is that correct?
It is true that the municipal clerk's office administers this program. Yes, Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you. So I had a conversation with a person who works in one of these establishments, and they had indicated that they believe we weren't accepting applications, or the applications were not being processed anymore. Is that true?
That is not true.
So do you have any thoughts on why perhaps we aren't getting many applications?
Through the chair, I do, Mr. Dunbar, and I would be happy to share those with you at the Public Safety Committee. I'd like to gather some information. The bar safety hour was passed several years ago. We can talk about the history of that, a few things that happened, some options for bar owners besides the bar safety hour. For example, a restaurant designation permit. Mm-hmm. But we would be happy to talk to you about that and let you know what's happening. The application is available on the clerk's website. There's no problem with people still applying.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. That's all I had.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Flynn.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Dunbar for raising the issue. This has never been heavily subscribed. This was the upshot of one of many efforts to try and address bar break, is the polite term for it. And I think the chief sort of hit it head on. When there's no revenue coming in the doors, operators are generally disinclined to keep the doors open. How you resolve that, very challenging. One of the things we dealt with the first iteration of this prior to this actual enactment was maintaining some separation between consumption hours and we'll call them more normal commuting hours, and how you maintain that separation without an associated stream of revenue is the challenge that I think the clerk was aiming at in terms of the restaurant designation, but that's another animal altogether. So we can discuss it at length at the Public Safety Committee meeting, and if you have ideas that you'd like to explore, I'd be happy to share some of my experiences with you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Seeing no one else in the queue, I ask unanimous consent to accept this AM, and I see no objection. That AM is accepted. We are now down to item 9E7, AIM 70, 2016, CFO recommendation for denial of tax incentives requested and the application for deteriorated area tax incentives from Peach Investments, LLC, and Peach Investment Corporation, September 30, 2015. Mr. Trainee.
Madam Chair, move to postpone to our next meeting.
Second.
Mr. Trainee, any comment?
Would someone want some more time to explore this item, because this ordinance that creates this doesn't expire until December 31st, 2017. I think we need some more time to see if something can be reached between the CFO and the applicants. So I want a couple more weeks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Is there any objection to, Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, Mr. Trainee or Mr. Harris, I was just curious, is this time that the administration is asking for as well, or are you opposed to us putting this forward?
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, I don't have any input into delaying.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. I ask unanimous consent to postpone accepting this memorandum until the meeting of June 21st. And is there any objection? Seeing no objection, that is postponed to the meeting of June 21st. Thank you. We are now down to item 9F5, AO 2016-66, an ordinance to establish the duties and responsibilities of a room rental hosting platform and to establish an alternative registration process for operators who use a hosting platform to conduct room rental transactions. Mr. Dunbar?
Move to approve.
No, it's not. This is for public hearing, Mr. Dunbar, so we need 3 to
Move to introduce, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chair,
Second.
Madam Chair, if I may, I presume Mr. Dunbar has a question or two. I'd like to offer him the courtesy of asking those questions prior to a motion to introduction.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn, but we have to have a motion on the floor first, and then he can comment. I appreciate your comments.
You
Do we have a motion on the floor?
If you get 3, then there's no questions to be asked.
Do we have 3 assembly members to introduce the ordinance?
I'm one of them.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Evans, do we have a third? Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. Mr. Dunbar?
Sure, and I apologize. I didn't think I was going to be the person driving our meeting tonight. But I'll try to keep this quick. I was wondering if someone from the administration could comment on this one, perhaps the municipal clerk. I'm sorry, not municipal clerk, the municipal attorney. So if I'm reading this right, this has to do with things like Airbnb. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's exactly right. This ordinance would create a new entry in our bed tax code to allow an entity such as an Airbnb or a vacation rental by owner, VBRO, to step in and voluntarily agree to collect bed taxes on behalf of the vendors it is advertising, and then to remit those taxes, relieving the underlying vendors of the obligation to do so.
So again, I apologize that I didn't have this discussion with you offline before the meeting. Is this standard practice in other cities? Will this in any way prevent these organizations from operating in Anchorage?
Through the chair, I know that there are many other jurisdictions that have negotiated arrangements with the Airbnb, VBROs of the world to allow them to be the single point of contact for collections. I don't know the statistics off the top of my head. I'm not sure if anyone else may. But this would certainly not preclude an entity like that from operating within the municipality.
Thank you, Mr. Folsey. Mr. Dunbar,
Madam Chair,
this ordinance is for introduction, and there's no debate for ordinances for introduction. So I would ask if you would save your questions for maybe offline, and then when we have it before us. I would appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Trainee?
Madam Chair, let's do a work session on this. There's going to be a lot of questions, not only from the Assembly, but from the industry. So I'd like a work session so we can address those questions and talk to Mr. Falsey, because I would think these people should be collecting this money now and contributing their portion for the bed tax. So let's have a work session.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. We will ask the clerk to schedule a work session before the public hearing on June 21st. Thank you. That ordinance is introduced for public hearing on the 21st. The next item on the agenda is item 9F12, laid on table item AR 2016-175, a resolution appropriating $5,500,000 of settlement proceeds as a contribution to the Port of Anchorage. Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question on timing. Is there a particular reason that this ordinance needs to be introduced tonight as opposed to at our following meeting as would be normal procedure?
Through the chair, we have been in negotiations with this settling party, and we are driving towards a June 21st pencil-to-paper inking of the settlement. If that were to slip, I don't know that the world would end, but we are only introducing this for introduction for a public hearing and action at the next meeting.
I'm aware of that, and if you've been around long enough now, Mr. Falsey. I'm not particularly inclined toward late on the table items. And so if it's critical, then I'm willing to entertain it. Otherwise, I would ask the indulgence of the body to allow us to follow the normal process and be introduced at our following meeting.
Madam Chair, we need a motion on this item.
We don't, if we don't want to introduce it. So I'm asking, is it critical?
Mr. Flynn, I have a comment, if you can hold off for a moment. And the comment is that we are going to go into executive session on this very issue. So with that said, Mr. Falls, did you have any other comments?
I would be happy to discuss this further in executive session. I think it would certainly be our preference that we could set this for introduction and action and public hearing at the next meeting. I don't know that I have more comments to offer beyond those.
Thank you, Mr. Falls.
Madam Chair, may I ask that we postpone this item following executive session that I was apparently not advised of previously?
Certainly, Mr. Flynn. If there's no objection to postponing until after we have our executive session, seeing no objection, that is postponed until after the executive session. Thank you, Mr. Flynn. We are now, what time is it? We are now to agenda item 11A, AO 2016-51, an ordinance amending the zoning map and approving the rezoning of Lot 1, Block 2, Benson subdivision from R2D, two-family residential district, to B3SL, general business with special limitations. The public hearing was closed on May 24th, and the action was postponed till the meeting of this evening. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve, Madam Chair.
Second.
Who made the motion to approve? Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Steele?
Thank you. This item was before us, and we had a rigorous debate the other night. This is an item to rezone a piece of property on Spenard Road, and I think things have been worked out, and it is supported by planning and zoning. So I would recommend approval.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Starr?
To the Chair, Mr. Steele, what's the status of the application for the other parcels that were sort of connected to the overall development?
The other parcels didn't need any rezone, and so they're not included in the item. If they come back with a development, they will be certainly included, but they're already zoned appropriately.
We're just still talking about that triangular piece, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks. Are they, last question, are they going to need that as the Spenard Road project gets going? The city or the DOT or anybody going to want to take access rights to that?
Not that I know of. It's back a little bit from Spenard Road. I mean, it fronts on Spenard Road, but there's enough of a setback that's not going to be an issue, I don't believe.
Well, I just don't want to. B3 property is worth more than the other zoning, so if we're going to just rezone it and resell it, did we just drive the price up?
Well, I don't get to dictate whether or not whether they're going to resell it or come back with a development proposal. But
well, can I ask you what? One of the debate items we didn't really get at is what are they going to do with the triangular piece?
They had. I saw a draft document that showed development of that parcel and the other one next to it, which they own also, into an office complex of some sort, but they did not have a specific operation that they were going to put in that structure.
Yeah, because the one next to it, if you're looking at the same one along the drive, is residential zone still, so you're talking about the one continuing down on Spenard?
Yes, and then there's two parcels behind it that are also zoned appropriately. So there's actually 4 parcels there once we do this that could be developed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Mr. Flynn?
I just want to clarify what I thought I heard Mr. Steele say. Mr. Steele, did you say that the planning and zoning has now approved this rezone?
They recommend approval.
Okay, I apologize. I read through the material. I did not see that. Do we have some?
I did. It's in the document.
thought they rejected this one. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Weddleton?
Just a point of information for Mr. Starr. This parcel is on a far separate section of Spenard Road than the project that'll go on next summer, so it's not connected.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. There's no one else in the queue. We have a first and a second. Mr. Trainee?
Mr. Abbott, is there any problem with approval of this item from the administration's perspective?
No, sir. The administration supports the Assembly action in support of the Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Ms. Dombrowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to help get a little bit of clarification here. If Erica could come up to the microphone, I think it might just clarify the record for people who are listening at home.
Don't trust me, huh?
Erica, so when we look at our packet and we're talking about planning and zoning's action, it's my recollection that planning and zoning wasn't wild about the other parcel B, but parcel A, the triangular portion, they did support the rezone on that one.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. Okay, we have a first and a second, and no one else is in the queue. Please vote. That item is approved 9-1 with one absence. Mr. Trainee?
Madam Chair, I want to change the order of the day and take up executive session item 19. We need to move into executive session to deal with a matter that deals with the legal aspects of the city of Anchorage. It's
Second.
proper for an executive session.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. We will now go into executive session. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Please vote on going into executive session. That's okay. We will now move into executive session. Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting of June 7th back to order. Mr. Falsey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Assembly has just exited from an executive session which is called for the primary purpose of update on the litigation Municipality of Anchorage versus ICRC et al., the Municipality of Anchorage versus MARAD. I believe there will be a motion regarding the unsealing of the tapes of that executive session at the end of the litigation processes.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Mr. Steele, you're in the queue.
I missed you.
You're not now. Mr. Trainee?
Madam Chair, I'll move that the information in the executive session is not to be released to the public until all matters of litigation involved with this are settled.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. We need to vote on that. Please vote. That is approved, 9 to 1 absent and 1.
Madam Chair.
Ms. Zimboski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to introduce item 9F12 AR number 2016-175.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Zimboski. Mr. Zimboski?
And we're setting public hearing, Ms. Nabowski, on the 21st of June.
Any comments?
No, ma'am. I just wanted to get it introduced.
Thank you. We need a third. Thank you. That resolution is introduced. Public hearing will be on the 21st of June. Next item on the agenda, and thank you for your patience, everyone, is a parent's request, item number 12A, Anchorage Unitarian Universalist Fellowship to present payment for lieu of taxes. Please come down.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Assembly, and representatives of the administration. Good evening. My name is Marty Freeman, and I'm currently the board president of the Anchorage Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, and I'm here today with a number of people from the fellowship. Like many families in Alaska, our church has a tight budget. In difficult economic times, our members and friends must make difficult decisions on what they can and cannot afford, and we as a congregation have to make the same tight decisions. It is significant, then, that our budget continues to include an annual payment in lieu of taxes, which we call our pilot contribution. It is part of our budget because our congregation insists on it. This year, in the middle of hard economic times, they increased it. They increased it because this contribution is a tangible demonstration of one of our core principles, the right of conscience and the use of democratic process within Unitarian Universalist congregations and in society at large. We try to live out this principle in our congregation and in our community. This year, we've been pleased to host the Airport Heights Community Council in our building and to participate in the council as a neighborhood landowner. We've hosted public forums on the state fiscal crisis because the timeliness and manner of addressing the crisis will determine whether it's done justly and compassionately. We also vote as a congregation to contribute to the municipal budget through a voluntary contribution. This contribution is a recognition that we, too, benefit from the social, educational, transportation, public safety, and recreation services provided by the municipality. We care too much about the future of our children and our grandchildren not to help pay for the upkeep of our city today. We also do this in affirmation of the separation of church and state that safeguards religious freedom for all in our nation. Therefore, we are pleased to present our voluntary payment in lieu of taxes for this year, as we have done for most of the 60 years that we've been a church in the municipality of Anchorage. We enjoy the benefits, and we commit to sharing the burden of our local government. In closing, we would like to thank you for your participation in the democratic process as elected officials and public servants. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Trainee is presenting the check to our Chief Financial Officer. Thank you. Ms. Zimboski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would be remiss if I let the moment go by without saying thank you to the members of the church. It's not every day that someone voluntarily donates money to the church or to the government when they don't have to. And we just want to let you know that we are very grateful, and I know there are many, many around the community that are also grateful for your contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. And on a side note, Airport Heights Community Council is one of Mr. Trainee and my 9 community councils, and we're so happy to meet at your church because that school was getting kind of tight. So thank you very much. Mr. Trainee?
Just want to thank you again for doing this. Every year I thank you guys, and I wish one day we'll have other churches doing what you do. And I think you've doubled what you did last year. So we appreciate it because everybody uses, as you said, transportation, police, fire. And if there's a fire, we don't check and say, did that church pay? And so it's really good that you guys do this voluntarily. Thank you again for doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Steele?
I just wanted to say this isn't all that you folks do either. All of the majority of the church, certainly the membership, is involved on a day-to-day basis with the city, with the community. And I greatly appreciate that participation as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. There's no one else in the queue. Again, thank you on behalf of all of us. We're now down to item 12B, Tim Potter on behalf of Anchorage Skates regarding Cuddy Family Midtown Park Skating Oval. This is the night for money. Thank you.
This is the night for money. Good evening. My name is Tim Potter with Anchorage Skates, Jim Rankert with Anchorage Skates, John Monroe with Anchorage Skate Club, and Peter Heusler, who is the president of the Alaska Speed Skating Club. All of us are kind of associated and interested in the fitness oval, which during the winter is used as a speed skating oval. Only the 6th full-size Olympic-sized speed skating oval in the United States. We should all be proud of that. And while we can't claim it's been 60 years, but because it's only been out there 7 years, this is the 7th installment of $10,000 that we've made. We made a commitment to raise money every year in an attempt to try and offset your contract costs for creating the ice and maintaining the ice from typically November through March. It's been a tough couple of years, but we've made it. And this year was especially good because through your matching grant with the donations that we had for sound equipment and going towards electrical, that pooled fund allowed us to do electrical modifications and extensions that not just meet our purposes, but other opportunities and needs for power improvements in the park itself, so that expanded that capability. The sound system is tremendous. If you got a chance to come to our solstice skate, which we have every solstice of every winter solstice, we had about 500 folks that showed up, free sleigh rides, skating, lights, costumes, you name it. It was a good time. And John Monroe, being a former coach with the Dutch Speed Skating Club, has commented, based on his worldly affairs in speed skating, what a great facility that we do have. The lighting is superb, so we do have a jewel, and we'd like to give this check to the city at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dick.
All right. I'm going to take a minute. Okay.
Ms. Dombosky?
Hold up the check.
Thank you, and I will just say, while they're getting their picture taken, again, this is a rarity to have 2 on one night, even. But this is the 3rd time I've seen Mr. Potter present this check, and every year it always amazes me because whether it's volunteer events to raise money or however you do it, I know it takes a lot of time and energy, and it definitely shows how connected, and it shows how much of a part the skating community really is with Anchorage, and it does not go unnoticed. We are very grateful.
Thank you, Mr.
I should add that the Anchorage Skate Club, which John Monroe is with Edwin Blair, this year put a temporary facility out at the Oval, used the power. It was a temporary warming facility and a place to store speed skates, which they had donated from another source. And they have a children's skate program, and they brought kids out from all over Anchorage to do speed skating events and instruction. So that went really well. And I managed to be able to help a young man. Was he from Somalia?
Sudan.
Sudan. That was his family's here in Sudan, never seen snow or ice before, and he went out and had a great time. So it was very good. We definitely appreciate the Assembly's help. So as we move forward, I'll give you a heads up right now that the next big project is to try and get a permanent warming facility at the Oval. We've got some preliminary designs. We'll get some contractor supplied numbers for the design and try and raise funds with your help to try and make that occur, because the park really is a wonderful asset to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. Mr. Trainee?
Mr. Potter, thank you. Thank you for all you do. Every year you're here, and we appreciate it. And it's so nice because Cuddy Park is in our Assembly District, Ms. Gray Jackson and myself, and it's become the real jewel of Anchorage.
You know, LV comes to the solstice skate and stuff almost every year, Dick, and I haven't seen you there.
I don't skate, though.
No. But anyway, thank you guys very much. We appreciate this. All of Anchorage appreciates it, so thank you.
And I just wanted to add, one of our long-term goals is that we believe every child that grows up in Anchorage should learn how to ice skate. And since I have a number of different hats, I'm going to put on another one right now. You all should have gotten an invitation to the Nike site dinner and tour in July, on July 14th, Thursday night. I hope you can make that. It's a wonderful tour, and you'll really enjoy getting up to the 4,000-foot level and seeing all of Anchorage.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say, with this Oval, maybe one of these days we'll have an Olympic skater from Anchorage win a gold or silver.
That'll be John's.
I think that's what John is trying to sow the seeds of right now. But we have had at least 2 Olympic skaters, medalists, come up and skate and talk and actually give seminars. And we had a young gentleman, Liam Ortega from Fairbanks, who is currently getting his degree in medicine in Milwaukee, who almost made the Olympic team for the last Winter Olympics. So we're almost there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
Working on it.
We will. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just want to take a moment to thank Mr. Trainee for accepting both of those checks on behalf of the municipality. And did you give them to the CFO?
$13,200. He was waiting for me when I got over there. Oh, no, much interest we've gained out since we accepted.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. We are now at agenda item 14A, AR 2016-143, a resolution confirming and levying assessments for the water special improvements within levy upon connection, Roll 16-W-1. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body? Mr. Starr?
Mr. Abbott, maybe you can answer this. When was all this work completed, both for this item and the next one?
Thank you.
We're obviously assessing after the work's completed.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Starr, I cannot answer this, but I am confident there are folks here that can. I'm going to ask Brett and Brian to come forward.
Madam Chair, I'm drifting into the next one as well, just the same answer. Then they don't have to get up twice. But
thank you, Mr. Starr.
So all the work has been done on these projects and is closed out?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Boss, who's the expert on the luck process.
I thought you knew everything.
My name is Brian Boss, Planning and Development Services Manager for the Anchorage Water Wastewater Utility. Through the chair, Mr. Starr, yes, all the work has been done on these projects. The luck roll, the subject of the luck roll are properties that are connecting to infrastructure that has already been built, and they are paying for the cost of their share of the main that provides the benefit of service to their property. So what happens is properties connect typically over the summer months. We gather those connections. Some of them are made to prepayments upon sale closings. Once we have about 10 to 20 properties, we submit these luck rolls to the Assembly for approval. So you see one about 2 to 3 times a year.
Yeah, and some of them are kind of old. They've hooked up years and years ago, maybe?
Well, we like to keep it within a year is the service level. So if you've made a connection or prepaid within a year, we try to place you on the luck roll within that year. But you are correct. There are some variances where there are properties that have been on for a number of years, and for whatever reason, they make it onto the roll later. Usually that's due to us resolving issues with the property owners or other things like that.
Good. That's all I needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. There's no one else in the queue. We have a first and a second. Please vote.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Flynn.
I believe we need to make an amendment on line 21 of page 1, inserting today's public hearing date of June 7.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Is there a second? Second. Thank you. Okay. Do we need to revote, Madam Clerk, or are we okay? Okay. There's a few folks who haven't voted, so thank you.
What are we voting on? Madam Chair, I'm not unclear on what
Mr.
we're
Weddleton?
I'm unclear on what we're voting on. Is it on this item?
We're voting on AR 2016-143, item 14A.
Okay, I thought I heard something about an amendment.
No.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Weddleton. You are absolutely correct. We are voting on Mr. Flynn's amendment, proposed amendment.
Point of order or clarity or whatever the Roberts rules is. Are you going to do that on every item then, Mr. Flynn? We traditionally don't insert dates. Is it you're just in?
We do on levy and connection.
Just to start it today?
No, we've done it for years.
No, I mean just to start the levy today, though.
No, it just has to reflect that the public hearing was held on this date. And so it's left blank pending our action, and so we insert it when we actually have the public hearing.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you, Mr. Starr and Mr. Flynn. I just reset the vote. We are now voting on Mr. Flynn's amendment. Please vote. That amendment was approved 10 to 1 absent. Now, the main motion on the floor is AR 2016-143. As amended. Thank you, Mr. Traney. As amended, please vote. That was approved 10 to and 1 absent. Thank you, Mr. Traney. We are now at item number 14B, AR 2016-144, a resolution of the Municipality of Anchorage confirming and levying assessments for the sewer special improvements within Levy Pond Connection LUC Row 16-S-1. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
There,
We got to put a date.
Mr. Weddleton?
Why move to approve?
Mr. Flynn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Same motion, line 21, insert the date June 7.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn.
Second.
Please, there's a first and second to insert the date. Please vote. That amendment is approved 10 to 0. The main motion is now before us, AR 2016-144. Please vote. That is approved 10 to 1 absent. We are now down to item 14C, AR 2016-160, a resolution appropriating $125,000 of other fines and forfeitures revenue to the Federal State Fine and Forfeiture Fund 257. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body? Mr. Starr?
I think it's already been moved. I can do that as well.
Please.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Mr. Starr?
Mr. Abbott, this action for the police appropriation out of forfeiture, does that grow the police budget?
Yes. These are funds that are not currently appropriated. So this, as we do every year when we propose to use forfeiture funds, this would be in addition to their general funds.
So a budget amendment is also being done right now, is what you're saying?
This is the spending authority.
The travel and training is the question I have in that regard. What are we doing there?
And I think I'm going to need the chief to respond to the specifics of that.
Chief, I'll preface my questions for this also is that there's specific guidelines which we're allowed to use the forfeiture funds under. We can't fund regular time hours or hire people specifically due on those dollars. What are we doing with travel and training?
Right, so you cannot supplant is the way we refer to it. And what this would be for is any various items that require specialized training to keep certifications and so on. For example, firearms training.
You have something in mind then?
I don't have those particular things broken down. It's just that we know what those items will be basically within 2016, so that we would use those funds to pay for that.
Right, that's my question. Well, you said it earlier in terms of supplanting already budgeted amounts or budgeted activities, so it's sort of the idea that it has to be over and above. We can talk about offline, but the report that was just submitted to the Assembly last meeting that talked about the audit of the forfeiture fund was specific to the findings in that report. So just want to keep us clean. We've had good audits, and we don't want that forfeiture fund to come under question.
Yes,
so
sir.
That's my questioning here, is that we're going the budget, but you've come up with new things that you need?
So, yes. So these are items that were not originally anticipated at the beginning of the year, and after careful consideration, make sure that it fits within the criteria that the Justice Department has set for the expenditure of those funds. We're comfortable making those moves.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Mr. Trainee?
Chief, can we use this for training of our dogs? Because a lot of this is drug money. Can we use this to enhance the training of our dogs?
It quite potentially could be, yes.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. There's no one else in the queue. Please vote. That item is approved. Mr. Flynn? Oh, okay.
You can show me as a yes or you can ignore me. I don't care.
All right, thank you, Mr. Flynn. We are now at item 14D, AR 2016-161, a resolution appropriating $105,840 from the State of Alaska DOT and appropriating $2,328 as a contribution from the 2016 Anchorage Police Department operating budget for impaired driving enforcement. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body? Ms. Dombrowski.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski.
I really do have a question.
No other comments?
I do have a question.
Oh, okay, Ms. Dombrowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Tolley, my question is, since we're talking about driving an impairment, what status do we have on potential sobriety tests for marijuana impairment?
I'm not really sure how I could answer that, Mr. Dombrowski.
Well, let me preface it from the last conversation that I remember. It's that there were field tests that were being developed. They were still in their infancy as to detecting somebody who has been driving and they're under the influence of marijuana, not just a sobriety test, but actual chemical, some sort of test you can do roadside. Any update on that?
Yes. So there is specialized training that goes into that to do the recognition that shows it's an impaired driver. And based on the test out in the field, gives the officer a probable cause to then obtain so that they can take a blood test and then have the blood analyzed.
Have you seen any movement in the field of detection as far as like cheek swabbing? I'm thinking about it in my mind like a breathalyzer. So is there anything that you're seeing the science moving towards something that an officer can do in the field without doing a blood test?
There is a lot of research being done and new products are coming out from time to time, but I'm sorry I don't have a list of those with me or anything.
That's okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. Thank you, Chief. There's no one else in the queue. Please vote. That was approved unanimously. We are now down to agenda item 14E, AR 2016-162, a resolution appropriating $52,482 and $102,000 as a contribution from the 2016 General Government Operating Budget for the Air Quality Program. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Second.
Thank you. There is no one in the queue. Please vote. That item was approved unanimously. We are now down to item 14F, AR 2016-163, a resolution appropriating $250,000 from the Talus West Limited Road Service Area and, for year-round road maintenance within the Talus West Limited Road Service Area. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
No one in the queue. Please vote. That item was approved unanimously. We are now down to item 14G, AR 2016-164, a resolution appropriating $3,562,573 as a contribution from the 2016 Chugach Birchwood Eagle River Rural Road Service Area for capital improvements. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. There's no one in. All right, Mr. Starr. There's no one in the queue. Please vote. That item was approved unanimously. We are now down to item 14H, AO 2016-57, an ordinance authorizing partial relocation of a non-exclusive right-of-way easement on municipal land in a dedicated Marston Park. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Seeing no one in the queue, please vote. I'm stuck here. Okay, here we go. Please vote. That was approved unanimously. We are now down to item 14I, AO 2016-58, an ordinance amending Anchorage Municipal Code Title IX to define back and angle parking and provide for designation of streets for angle parking. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the board?
Move to approve.
Second.
Ms. Domboski.
Thank you. This is a new concept for me, and I was just curious if the administration could tell me, it references a couple of streets that are identified to utilize this method. Anybody have any ideas where they're going?
10th to 27th.
Madam Chair, if you don't mind me interrupting, I think Mr. Flynn might be able to help this. It'll be in his area.
He was shaking when I said I had never heard of this, so he knows it, so I would love an education.
Sure.
Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is specifically aimed in the immediate term at 10th Avenue between L Street and roughly, I think E, maybe they're going to go all the way to C, I'm not sure exactly, but it's the bike lane that we approved in one of our parks bonds for striping. But in that area, along the park strip, they have angled parking on the north curb. And the purpose of back-end angle parking is that when motorists are pulling out, they'll have a better field of vision for the non-motorized traffic, specifically bicycles, and hopefully minimize the number of vehicular, non-vehicular incursions. And so this has actually been employed in other jurisdictions. I've seen it traveling around various locations. I couldn't name one off the top of my head, but it's similar to, I back into my parking spot at home. I do it when I go to the mall, just so I have a better field of vision when I'm pulling out. And in fact, if you worked on the North Slope, you wouldn't be allowed to park where you had to make a reverse movement to leave. So,
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr.
I don't know if the
Domboski.
administration has anything to add.
Mr. Weddleton.
I just want to make a comment. I actually say that this change is long overdue, and we've missed opportunities throughout the city to do back and diagonal parking, where we do parallel parking or nose first parking. It's safer, not just for bicyclists. This seems to emphasize bicycling, but it's simply safer in virtually every case. It's also been in Title 21 for over 3 years, so it is something that's acknowledged in Anchorage. There's opportunities on Spenard Road and just numerous places. I hope that we see more of this now that this is in Title IX. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Flynn, you're still in the queue. Would you like to talk some more?
I apologize. I was just ringing in to respond to Ms. Domboski's inevitable question.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Abbott.
Nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Mr. Steele.
I was just going to say that we have been talking about this for some time along Spenard Road, but this identifies not only the 10th Avenue but also a 27th bike thoroughfare, if you will, with back-end parking.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was wondering if anyone had contacted the driver training schools in town to train individuals to back into angle parking. I don't think most of the drivers in this town have had much practice at that, and so maybe at least the new drivers could be trained so that they'd be more ready than some of the other drivers. Just a thought I had.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Maybe you could give them a call. How's that? There's no one else in the queue. Please vote. That is approved unanimously. Next item on the agenda is item 14J, AO 2016-54, an ordinance to add industrial uses in the Chugach Eagle River use table for consistency with the defined uses in Chapter 5. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Second.
Mr. Starr.
Not trying to we're early tonight. Erica, are we holding a development permit based on this correction? Do we have somebody that's been affected by this? And
through the chair, Mr. Starr, there is a gentleman who will be affected by this, but his development project has not been held up.
oh, good. That's the answer I was looking for. So thank you very much, and appreciate you following through on this.
Thank you, Mr. Starr.
Urge
Ms.
approval.
McConnell, there's no one else in the queue. Please vote. That item was approved unanimously. We are now down to item 14K, 2016-55, an ordinance amending Anchorage Municipal Code 1705-070 and 1705-010 to provide for strict liability for violations of Title 17. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Please come up front and state your name and spell your last, please.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Steele, Mr. Steele, one moment, please.
I would like to be recused from this particular item. I have a conflict.
Mr. Steele, the chair rules that you do have a conflict, so thank you for reminding me. He's leaving. Yes. That's okay. That's all right, honey. Okay, goodbye, Mr. Steele. See you shortly. Hello.
Hi, Madam Chair, members of the Assembly. My name is Susan Soule, S-O-U-L-E. Where to begin? I recognize, having had a conversation earlier with the chair of the Animal Control Advisory Board, I recognize your immediate need to revise Title 17 to turn it into a strict liability ordinance. However, I hope that that is only the start of a procedure, because I believe firmly that Title 17, as it pertains to dogs and violations, needs a thorough rewrite. Yes, it is a civil offense involving no jail time and just a fine. However, the consequences for the owner and the dog can last 2 years, can involve restrictions on the dog's behavior, can involve the owner having to remodel the yard. It can even involve a dog being put to death. This level of severity, it seems to me, in the long run, requires a revision of the ordinance that allows animal control to consider the circumstances surrounding the violation. For instance, was the dog off-leash in a park, which is a violation of the ordinance already, or did the dog get loose by accident? Two different levels of responsibility for the owner that need to be considered. There are also the nature of the violation. There are different, for instance, different kinds of dog bites. A dog bite can be predatory and aggressive, or a dog bite can be a nip. There are different kinds of dogs. There are aggressive dogs, there are reactive dogs, there are scared dogs. Animal control needs the ability to take this into consideration in order to resolve a situation in a way that helps both the owner and the dog become, if you will, better citizens. I suggest a thorough rewrite of the relevant part of Title 17 and its enforcement. First of all, I think the leash law needs to be enforced. The loose dogs on the trails are a hazard, and I don't know a single trailhead that doesn't have a sign stating dogs must be kept on leash and the number of the municipal ordinance. Never enforced. I know of a little toddler who was knocked over by a loose dog just today. When a dog engages in a behavior that warrants a citation, let's have an ordinance that allows the circumstances to be looked at. If a dog does something severe like biting, let's require an animal behaviorist to evaluate the dog and come up with a training and modification plan specific to that dog and that owner. In a way, having had a dog that was restricted for 2 years, the restrictions really do impact one's life, and not to mention the effect on the dog. There also should be an appeal process that does not require filing in Superior Court. In other words, the Animal Control Appeals Board should be reestablished. Along with these changes, I would like to see, and I think we need, many more designated off-leash areas where it's legitimate to have your dog off-leash, to walk and bike and whatever. And people with toddlers know, hey, this is a dog off-leash dog area. Don't go there.
Can you sum up, because your time is up? It's 3
Okay,
minutes. Thank you.
really quickly, I also think animal control and enforcement needs more resources and perhaps more training. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. There's no questions. Anyone else wish to be heard? Good evening, sir. Please state your name and spell your last.
My name is Ron Alleva, spelled A-L-L-E-V-A. I was waiting to the end of the meeting, but since you're mentioning a rewrite of the dog ordinance, I'm the individual who sued in Superior Court and won over the dog ordinance. I think animal control has way too much power. When my dogs were out of the yard, under my daughter's control, the neighbor took instant time to immediately get her camera and take a picture of the dogs off their leash, and she alleged they were out of control. Testimony at the appeals hearing said that her action took less than a minute from the dog's release from the house, and the picture indicated the dogs were going back to my house. It cost me $3,000. I got half of that returned. But never again will I let animal control come onto my property. They can get a civil assist, but the way they ruled as Gestapo, not only as animal control officers, but also the appeals hearing officer. She was an attorney. I thought she had some medical problems. She was so outrageously angry. And I said, you got to be reasonable, rational, and in touch with reality when it comes to dog control. So if you're going to rewrite this, I know Mr. Steele, who's not here, had some issues with neighbors, but I'd be very cautious how you write this, because once a violent dog, and my daughter was bit by a German Shepherd, and they had to put down the dog. So I know both ends of this, but the way animal control is presenting themselves today is wrong, and it's unjust. And it has to be monitored real close and restricted. And one last note, since I always appear here, mostly on another issue of the homeless shelter alternative location was animal control. But they decided to put it down by me. So animals get treated pretty well, even at animal control. You still don't have the clock. I'm going to offer to...
28 seconds.
28 seconds? You know, if you get a clock, I could summarize a lot quicker. And it's under the Equal Protection Act that I can't go beyond 3 minutes other than a question or at the discretion of the chairman to allow me 30 extra seconds. Get a clock. I'll buy it if it's less than $10. Get a clock. Am I done?
You are done.
Are there any questions?
There doesn't seem to be, but thank you very much for being
Oh,
here.
you're welcome. My dog's waiting outside for anyone who votes against
Okay,
him.
great. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Approval, Madam Chair.
Need a second?
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Dombrowski? No?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do it. Madam Chair, I want to go ahead and move amendment number 1. It's from Assemblymember Croft originally.
Second.
And if you'd like, I can read his summary. Would that help?
Great, Ms. Dombrowski.
Thank you. This is the proposed amendment. This amendment would retain the general strict liability standard in Title 17, but would afford the owners and custodians of escaped animals the option of establishing by clear and convincing evidence that a structure was a, quote, secure enclosure, end quote, despite the fact that it failed to prevent the release of the animal because the animal's release from the enclosure was primarily caused by a factor not attributable to the character of the enclosure or to an act or omission of the owner, custodian, or the animal. Where an animal escapes from a fenced yard because, for example, a portion of the fence is destroyed by a fallen tree or because the fence fails in an earthquake, the animal's owner or custodian should be able to rebut liability. The amendment, the text of the amendment, he has 2 here. Page 2, beginning at line 5, adding new language. It says, where? The second page, there we go. The owner or custodian of an animal may establish by clear and convincing evidence that a structure was a, quote, secure enclosure, end quote, despite failing to prevent the release of an animal because the animal's release was primarily caused by a factor not attributable to the character of the enclosure or to an act or omission of the owner or custodian or the animal. And that's the amendment.
Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And in memory of my former legislative colleague, Max Gruenberg, I actually want to offer an amendment to this amendment. You're welcome. And if you go down to line 4, I believe he was trying to say the word primarily and not primary. So my amendment would be to change the word from primary to primarily.
I concur with that.
Is that a second?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Let's vote on the first amendment to change the word. Can you repeat that again, Mr. Peterson, please?
Certainly, Madam Chair. On the 4th line of the amendment where it's in the changed language, where it says animals' release was primarily caused by a factor not attributable to the character of the enclosure.
Thank you. Let's vote on Mr. Peterson's amendment, please. I think one person didn't vote. Mr. Steele's not here, that's right. That was approved unanimously. We're now at the main amendment brought forward by Ms. Dombrowski, and I don't see anyone in the queue. Please vote. That amendment was approved 7-2. We are now at the main motion. Ms. Dombrowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I struggled with this one a little bit because I'm trying to understand why we're going away from a reasonable standard, and I guess I'm not an attorney, so I'm trying to understand the strict liability component of it. I don't know, Mr. Falsey, if you can give me a very quick summation of why this is needed. I mean, I read the document, but I'm still not quite convinced yet.
Through the chair, I'd be happy to make an attempt, Assemblymember Domboski. In the world of traffic offenses, if you are going 60 miles per hour in a 55 mile per hour zone, it is enough that you are speeding that you can be cited by the police. It's a strict liability offense. The way the Title 17 Animal Control Ordinance has always been intended to operate and has always operated until very recently was exactly the same way. If your animal was out and about and not confined as it was required to be by the code, it is enough that the animal was loose. In recent years, we have had two adverse Superior Court decisions based on a Court of Appeals decision which said if there is any volitional type language in a code, we will read in a negligence standard. That put our code enforcement folks and our administrative hearing officer in a new position where when we find an animal that is not confined, we no longer have to prove just that the animal was loose, but also that there was some negligence on the part of the owner that caused the animal to become loose. That isn't how the title has been historically structured, and it wasn't how it was intended to operate, and it will make animal control enforcement much more difficult going forward.
Okay, so basically what you're saying to me, let me just regurgitate it into non-lawyer speak. So what you're saying is for many years we operated under this strict liability. Basically, if they caught your dog out, your dog was out, it was on you. But because of a couple of court cases, now they're having to interpret it differently, and so you're trying to clarify that and go back to the way that it had always been used.
Yes, through the chair, we are trying to return to the state of play before the two adverse Superior Court decisions. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Thank you, Mr. Domboski. Mr. Training.
Mr. Falsey, I understand you wrote Mr. Croft's amendment. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, I did assist Mr. Croft with that amendment. So I will take responsibility for the primarily problem.
It won't have a negative effect on the enforcement of 14K, his amendment?
No, I don't think so, through the chair. It would retain this general strict liability standard, but offer reasonable grounds for a person whose dog was loose to rebut the strict liability in appropriate circumstances.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Training, Mr. Falsey. Mr. Starr.
No, I'll just wait.
We're at the main motion, Mr. Starr.
Well, to that end, Mr. Falsey, through the chair, what Mr. Trini just asked you seems to be a little bit contrary to what you're trying to do, which is give a little bit more of the authority that I saw your dog off leash, therefore it is off leash. And it seems simple enough, but the past practice and the current practice is to have some discretion at the enforcement arm of a warning, a required warning statement, and then the discretion about when to cite is still preserved. So what I'm worried about is that we send a mixed message now to the code enforcement folks is this is the only thing you get to do because we just said it has to be very strict. And there is no question why that dog was off leash, or in my case, what I see now is I don't have a dog, but others seem to have the dog off leash, but well under control. Chugach Eagle River, we roam crazy out there, and the dogs seem to behave. So to Mr. Trainey's question, in my analogy, how do you say that it now needs to be brought back to the old way when my interpretation of the old way was discretion by the enforcement officer?
Through the chair, this would not do anything to eliminate the prosecutorial discretion or the discretion of the code enforcement officer themselves. So just as an APD officer could pull you over for going 60 miles per hour in a 55 mile per hour zone and say under the letter of the law you have committed an infraction, but I'm going to let you off with a warning. This time, the animal control enforcement retains that discretion, and I believe it has been part of the conversation that the animal code enforcing folks realize that that state of play would not be changing under this ordinance.
Just again, the language, the legislative language that's now a strict interpretation seems a little contrary to that statement from those that aren't here and user in practice. It seems to be a selective choice. Well, it's going to be because I say today, well, the next guy puts a pretty good case, he gets some flexibility, then we don't have a fairness factor going between cases. I just see these things. That all the calls that I get on my legislative watch, about 70% of them are related to dog and animals, chickens, things like that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. There is no one else in the queue. Please vote on the main motion as amended. That was approved 8-1. We are now at Agenda Item 14L, AO 2016-61, an ordinance amending Anchorage Municipal Code to allow the building official to extend the permit under Section 2310-104-3.1 to waive or reduce fees under Section 2310-104-3.4, and to waive or reduce the cash bond under Section 2310-104-3.5, extension, reduction, and waiver, to be subject to public interest findings. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to postpone indefinitely.
We need a second.
Second.
There is no one in the queue. Please vote. That item is postponed indefinitely. We are now at an addendum to the agenda. It's item 14M, AO 2016-62, an ordinance providing code interpretation to resolve ambiguity and avoid a rezone application at private expense for business and professional offices zoned I-1 in the Huffman Town Center. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to postpone indefinitely.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Is there a second? There's no one. Thank you. Ms. Domboski.
I just would like a little clarification. I thought M was supposed to substitute for L. Why are we postponing this indefinitely?
Oh, actually, they're two separate issues.
Roger that.
L is regards
Girdwood.
Girdwood, an issue in Girdwood, and
Oh,
M
that's
is
right. It was the health clinic.
thing, right.
I'm sorry. I just glanced down at 14M. Sorry. I was having a sidebar. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Domboski. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. There's no one in the queue. Please vote to postpone indefinitely. That item is postponed indefinitely. We are now down to item 15A.
Madam Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had been previously recused from consideration on this item. So with that, I'll bid you a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Have a good evening.
You see Mr. Steele out there, send him in.
I think he went home. He went home. Mr. Trainee?
Madam Chair, a moment of personal privilege, if I might.
Certainly, Mr. Trainee.
We have a constituent that has a birthday today. Mr. Felix Rivera used to work for the administration. He's out in the audience. Happy birthday, Felix.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. He still works for the administration, the mayor's office. So, anyway, happy birthday. You're welcome. We are now down to item 15, special orders, 15A, notice of motion to amend something previously adopted, AR 2015-261S, AK Alchemist, LLC, DBA AK Alchemist.
Thank you for reading that, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, Mr. Starr.
I move to amend a previously adopted Resolution 261S by modifying Section 6 to add the words, "The protest of proposed ABC restaurant eating place license number 5367 for this location is lifted upon approval of this limited conditional use permit."
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Domboski. Thank you, Mr. Starr.
And the history of those that have not been here, and I've used two aspects that are helpful. One is the amending something previously adopted. It allows us to kind of cut to it without having to resubmit. So the idea that a previously adopted item is what I'm after, with the idea of modifying a certain section. The back history of the item is that, if you've read it, it's fairly elaborate in the terms and conditions that we put to play. And when it got to ABC, they didn't particularly like the terms and conditions that ABC was held under. And I think we probably went a little overboard asking ABC to be our enforcement arm. So the simple matter of it in pragmatics, it separates out the duties and responsibilities, leaves ABC to vendor and appropriately legislate the liquor permit side of things, and then the conditions and the conditional uses thereof the site are now back in our bailiwick under the municipal. So fairly procedural, and I believe ABC was probably right. So the indulgence of not trying to recreate a February 9th action item is solved by this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. There's no one in the queue, but I just want to thank you, Mr. Starr, for the explanation. It's very helpful to all of us. Thank you. We need to vote on this. Please vote. That was approved. That was approved. Okay, we are now down to item 17, audience participation. Anyone wish to speak to us this evening? Hello.
Good evening. Ron Alleva, A-L-L-E-V-A, and this meeting hasn't adjourned. I don't know where Mr. Flynn left early, but I want to register a protest of that. He should state at the end of the meeting. To Felix, happy birthday. He's leaving. I believe he's leaving, but he's a great employee in the mayor's office, and I've worked with him. That's an asset leaving the city. Real quickly, I will pay for the clock. I think it's one-sided when you can watch the clock, and emotions and data go through our heads as public speakers. We lose track of time. I think it's an improvement to democracy to, if we only have 3 minutes, let's see the clock tick off and we'll summarize and move things along. So buy the clock, send me a bill, I'll owe you the money and the city will never be broke. So, with that, I want to commend the Unitarian Universal Fellowship. I think Ruth Moulton was a member, but I believe they're not listed as pilot. I think that's payment in lieu of taxes. I don't know why you would accept that, but not accept my $30,000, which I won in a lawsuit. You should still get to $10,000, 5 from Beans, 5 from the brother Francis, because I didn't want to sue myself. But staying focused, the changes that are necessary to restore fairness to the tax code. Last assembly meeting, you talked about a surcharge to pay for the roof and then take out some money to pay for a piano. A surcharge is at the Sullivan Arena. Nonprofits in Anchorage are out of hand. They're not paying any taxes. There has to be a commission and an overlord to see if they're really nonprofits, because some of the wages of executives from the United Way, Rural Cap, they're just way out of line. And if they have the money to pay those wages, they can pay some taxes. And the taxes should be regulated to an assessment or a surcharge to the insurance premiums they pay for fire insurance, liability, and that kind of draws in police protection. So I shouldn't be paying for my fire truck to go to a church or a nonprofit. A church especially, because I may not believe in their beliefs. So why should I pay my firemen to put out a fire in their facility? So if you take the mill rate and apply it to the insurance premium that they're paying, we could make 30 to 40 million additional tax revenues, and not call it a tax, but call it a surcharge.
You want to sum up?
Pardon me?
The bell just went up, but I'll give you a moment to sum up.
Oh, sum up. Thank you,
You're welcome.
Madam Chairman. I should salute, but I won't.
No, please don't.
Anyway, the surcharge should be looked into, because this legal genius over here, who is beyond legal knowledge of even the greatest legal scholars in the nation, should take on this assignment and go after those churches and nonprofits to pay for the police and fire protection that the normal taxpayer is paying for. Are there any questions?
No, there are no questions. But
Are you sure? Take a look again. There's a malfunction. You all have a good night.
Well, actually, Mr. Peterson has a question.
Oh, do you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And actually, there's a group of citizens that are part of the Budget Advisory Group that are actually taking a look at the nonprofits, I believe.
Well, if I can comment, actually, the Budget and Finance Committee, we have on our agenda for our next meeting to continue the conversation about property tax exemption for nonprofits. And this was the result of the Budget Advisory Commission's report, and they asked the Budget and Finance Committee to look into it. So if you want to join us, the next meeting is the 16th of June from 1:30 to 2:30, and it's in the Assembly Conference Room. Thank you.
Okay, that's what I referenced, but that's 2 years ago, and nothing's happened. You have to take away some of that sanctimonious moral shield that they have and don't think they have a responsibility to pay. We had a church tonight do the right thing voluntarily, but we should enforce it and charge them.
Thank you, Mr. Levitt. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Anyone else wish to speak this evening? Anyone else? Okay, well, we are down to Assembly.
Move to adjourn, Madam Chair.
We're adjourned. Thank you, Madam.